Arab journalists' perception of Western tech companies, chatbots, AI tools available online. They sometimes believe that those tools are trained on data that we don't know, and this data will be full of stereotypes, biases in Western interpretation of major issues happening in the Arab world, and it will not be honest enough, accurate enough, or fair and neutral enough for us to use.
We usually talk about biased data and inaccurate interpretations regarding technologies that comes from the East, China, for example. Yet we rarely discuss the lack of transparency and biased data produced by Western tech companies. So it was refreshing to have this conversation with Rana Arafat, assistant professor in digital journalism at City, University of London. Arab newsrooms, Indian elections, and the Israel-Palestine war. What do they have in common? We discussed all of this through the lens of AI manipulation, disinformation, and algorithmic bias. What was the most surprising discovery for you personally while you were researching AI manipulation, disinformation, and algorithmic bias in the global south, specifically in the Middle East?
Actually, I think the most surprising thing is how we perceive the availability of the technology as something always good, something always empowering journalists, empowering the public, and all of that. Although this is not the truth, because we have to pay attention that technology in some authoritarian countries in the global south are a burden on the shoulders of journalists rather than being empowering for their own work because of many things. First of all, we have to say that many authoritarian countries right now are building their own chatbots, and they are censoring the use of Western chatbots such as like Bard, ChatGPT, and all of that. And in this process of building their own chatbots, their own AI technologies, they are filtering data. So they are training AI models on certain filtered and censored data in order to like get some answers and get some, information spread to their people that is totally, censored and totally filtered out by the government. So while people are always, especially in the Western, world, are always very optimistic about this empowering side of AI technologies and how it enables people to get access to large data and big data and all of this with no prior technological experience, I have to say that is a major thing. It is a major threat to many journalists and to the public audience in many parts of the world where authoritarianism is still like a big thing and technology is being used to even censor people more, control people more, and all of that.
What is the government's involvement in regulating and controlling generative AI technology? The Saudi government, for example, has its own chatbot, as does the UAE's government. How unbiased is their data? What do we know about it?
Unfortunately, we don't know much about, the data sets they train their AI models on. So that's the major problem here, because I'm not talking about the Saudi government now, but in general, in many countries in the global south, there is a lack of data transparency, and there is like a big limitation to accessing public data and public records, which restricts local innovation to a great extent because of the limited access to big data to train AI models on. Because all of the data is in the hands of governments, this give them like much power into like selecting and filtering which data to include and which data to exclude, how they want their chatbots or AI models to work and operate. So actually some governments are not very transparent about the type of data they train their AI models on. Some are trying to give some information regarding that, including in United Arab Emirates, since they are giving like some information about like which data sets they train their Jason J's chatbot, for example, on, and they give information more than other governments. So it's actually we still have differences and nuances between different countries, but we have to be very alert for and cautious about the repercussions and implications for governments creating chatbots rather than independent tech companies creating them in those, restrictive political systems and restrictive media environments.
It's interesting. You just said independent tech companies. Look what's happening now with big tech, with Google, Meta, Microsoft, etc. They are basically becoming more and more partisan. They're pledging allegiance to the Trump's administration. I was just talking to some researchers who look into how big tech companies behave themselves in Europe. In a way, they notice that how they kind of also ally with local governments. So the government information has some sort of priority in Google search even. Okay, they can't prove it, but they look at the algorithms, how they work. Did you observe anything like this in the Middle East? How do they behave there? Independent tech companies?
I observed this in local newsrooms. So, for example, we have some examples from Egyptian newsrooms or like Arabic newsrooms where newsrooms themselves had to outsource some, experts and developers to work on AI related technologies. And the major problem there, like this is what I heard from those tech developers, is that it's always very hard for them to get access to like large data sets because it's not publicly available. So this makes their job to create, or train AI models even harder. Sometimes because they are outsourced, it's so hard for them to actually understand the basic needs and the true needs of the newsrooms since they are not living there or like working there every day with journalists. The availability of the data is like one thing. Also, as I said, many newsrooms in the Arab region, for example, don't have their tech team. They have to outsource them from third-party companies. Also, we have to say that many countries, especially in the global south, many newsrooms, they encounter like lack of financial resources, lack of training on the use of AI tools and AI technologies, lack of technical and digital infrastructure.
So when I was reading your research, because it corresponds a lot with my experience because I'm consulting a lot of different newsrooms in the global south, and most of my time, like last couple of years, I spent in the global south. So I'm in India now. So when you talk about unstable internet connection, I know the pain. Yes, of course. And this is one of the basic issues in a way, like from quite technologically advanced India, even that's happening. I would like to dive into, because you have some really good insights from the Arab newsrooms. You look specifically into 3 countries: Egypt, Lebanon, if I'm right, and United Arab Emirates. Just again, for the sake of our listeners, I think it's important to mention that when we speak of Arab countries in the Middle East, this is not a homogeneous space, even in relation to technological development. And there are, of course, wealthier countries like Saudis and Qatar and UAE. They experimented with AI technology before ChatGPT arrived. Al Jazeera Arabic had their first AI presenter. I think they did it 23. Qatar or Kuwait even a bit earlier. So they experimented with that before. But some other countries, like you looked in the newsrooms in Egypt and Lebanon, they did not. So how does this divide within the Arab world affect the adoption of AI technology in the region?
As you said, I think it's so important to not always to look at the divide between the global north and south, because inside the global south and inside each region, there is like AI disparity and there is like an AI adoption divide. In Gulf countries, as you mentioned earlier, they have, started experimenting with AI technologies and AI chatbots and AI news anchors long time ago, like even before the introduction of ChatGPT or like before AI became the new hype. If you take United Arab Emirates as an example, they have like a ministry for artificial intelligence right now. So it's just like a governmental, country-driven approach to implementing AI in different sides of industry and work. While when you look at Egypt, for example, we're still far behind that, because when newsrooms want to implement AI, they are doing this as, individual, independent, separate experiences. We have to say that even in those countries, countries, including Egypt, there are still some valuable experiences for news automation, for using chatbots, for example. We have to say that El Masri Al for example, is one of the Egyptian newsrooms, the first Egyptian newsrooms to create its own chatbot to interact with their own audiences on the website, to answer questions, to recommend certain types of news. So they are implementing this with, some technology, and they are experimenting with this right now. Cairo 24, for example, it's a news website. It's a digital native. They also try to, experiment with news automation, although it was like a very simple, very experimental type of experience, but they learned a lot from it. They found some mistakes in the automated news, and they tried to build a team of human editors to do post editing on the automated published news and make sure it doesn't have any mistakes. But they are trying to like push the automation and the AI adoption in the area with what they have. Many of those news outlets, they depend mainly on their ads and social media revenues. And that's why sometimes technology adoption is even a burden on the shoulders of journalists who are asked to like implement new technology while they are being asked to produce a lot of stories every day, come up with like engaging stories, conform to the algorithmic design and the type of formats of journalism that each social media platform prefers. So it's just like an extra burden for them to implement technology and teach themselves about technology while at the same time produce good journalism and make a lot of revenues. Surprisingly, I found that many of those newsrooms, people are still confused about what AI means and how to define AI, although some of those newsrooms are implementing a lot of AI into their own, news distribution and news production processes.
You specifically looked into Egyptian, Lebanese, and United Arab Emirates newsrooms on three levels: narrative, practice, and technological infrastructure. Let's talk about the narrative level first. What exactly do you mean by that? And what did you find out? What were the most interesting findings on that narrative level?
Yeah, so on the narrative level, I meant that journalistic, perceptions level, they don't believe that AI will take away their jobs at all. They always believe that AI is going to be like a tiny helper for the news production process, but human journalists will always be the most valuable asset for any newsroom. So that's the narrative level. On the practice level, I looked at how they actually, use AI tools and why they use AI tools in order to achieve different, tasks. And we found out that it's still, very early to judge the practice now, since a lot of journalists are just experimenting with available tools, but they're still so far behind when it comes to using AI tools for fact checking, because they have this impression and perception that AI tools are there to increase and boost the widespread of disinformation and misinformation, rather than thinking of it as a credible source for doing fact checking or doing data verification. So data visualization is a big thing using AI, generating ideas and transcribing interviews, but fact checking and data verification is still, not well perceived. On the infrastructure level, as I mentioned before, it differs greatly within this, not only between different countries, but also within the same country, because, some newsrooms, some digital natives, for example, in Egypt, they are still struggling to get the right infrastructure and get the right, tech developers to help them with adopting this technology, because they don't have enough money for that. So we always have to look at technology adoption from this lens, like how people perceive it, how they actually implement it in terms of practice, and how the infrastructure might be a major problem, a major source of delaying this type of adoption when it's not available or when it's so expensive or time consuming for them.
Is there any cross-pollination between journalists and developers in those newsrooms in Egypt, Lebanon, and again, United Arab Emirates, and probably they're all different. Even maybe within United Arab Emirates, different newsrooms kind of differ on their approach to that.
We found like also some disparities and some nuances between different newsrooms. Some newsrooms don't have an in-house tech developer team, so they outsource them. Some have an in-house tech developer team, so the communication between journalists and tech developers happen, all of the time in editorial meetings. Tech developers understand what journalists actually need. And this is a major issue. Like those newsrooms that could actually experiment with AI are those who have in-house, tech teams that have a constant discussion and communication and conversation with journalists, understanding their needs and understanding what type of tools they can develop to make their lives easier. Integrating those teams together, thinking of tech developers as insiders and not outsiders to newsrooms is a major and key element here for implementing and, accelerating the adoption of technology.
And you talk extensively about lack of knowledge and AI training in those newsrooms you've observed. Does it mean that there is no AI implementation strategy either? Or might a strategy be adopted by people who have an understanding and vision, whilst at a different level, journalists and product might not have sufficient knowledge to buy in and implement? So is that, and also the lack of training, is it about money again, or is it some sort of managerial issues?
I think in Egypt and Lebanon, in the newsrooms I talk to, it's mainly they don't have an AI implementation strategy. They don't have a very clear technological development strategy in the newsroom. So I think it's a managerial thing. And when I talk to some news managers, I found out that they, even sometimes when they have those ideas in mind, they are not well communicated to journalists. So journalists sometimes don't know about how news managers perceive this technological advancement and to what extent they want to implement some sides of it. It's an issue of communication. It's an issue of integrating journalists in building those technological advancement strategies and policies in those newsrooms. And this is a major thing. Since it's United Arab Emirates is a bit different, since the government itself and the country itself has like an orientation towards implementing latest technology. So newsrooms have instructions and have motivation to implement AI tools as well and implement those technologies. They try to offer more collective perception on adopting AI, and they have clearer strategies, but it's not available everywhere, of course.
Gosh, sounds so familiar again to those newsrooms I work with. So it's such a pain. And what also I feel the journalists, they burn out because of that, because they feel that they have such a workload. Even again in the global south, it depends. It depends. You can be a small newsroom, but if you have innovative thinking managers or even journalists themselves, it can be completely different story. I was just wondering, Rana, so from everything you've observed in the Middle East region, would you say that generative AI technology is used there to empower people or on the contrary, to control them?
As I said before, we have to differentiate between those AI tools that are available by, local governments and AI tools that are available generally by, Western tech companies. Arab journalists' perception of those Western tech companies, chatbots and AI tools available online, they sometimes believe that those tools are trained on data that we don't know, and this data will be full of stereotypes, biases in Western interpretation of major issues happening in the Arab world, and it will not be honest enough, accurate enough, or fair and neutral enough for us to use. And this is like a major problem that was making a lot of journalists in the Arab region at the beginning hesitant and reluctant to use ChatGPT, Bard, and Gemini, and all of these tools at the beginning. Now they are less afraid to use them, less reluctant from, like my conversations, formal and informal conversations with journalists, they started to implement them more, but they are very cautious about the biases, the stereotypes, the mistakes, the inaccuracies, the problems that might promote one side of the story rather than on, their own side of the story. Many Egyptian journalists, for example, connect those AI technologies to algorithms, especially on Meta platforms during the Gaza war, where it was so hard for journalists to post videos and post content that has words like hashtag Free Palestine, Free Gaza, or all of that, because of the algorithmic, control and content moderation performed by Meta on these platforms, making it so hard to promote pro-Palestinian voices and all of that. So people started, especially journalists started to be more skeptical about algorithms and the control algorithms can impose on spreading and non-spreading certain messages and non-spreading certain news. And this made them even more cautious about what these technologies can create to us, can create to our political sphere, can create to our voices being heard by more people, restricting our voices and all of that. So it's another issue that they connected together, like the hype on AI and chatbots and ChatGPT and all of that, while seeing, the algorithms are very mean to them, are very evil to them, restricting their own messages on Facebook and Instagram. So they are connecting both together and feeling a lot of stress.
So let's talk about shadow banning in the context of the Gaza war. So what is shadow banning and how was it used during the Israeli-Palestinian war? What were your observations?
The Gaza conflict has highlighted the controversial role of algorithms in shadow banning news on social media platforms. Shadow banning is basically the practice of restricting the visibility of certain content without notifying the user. A lot of people, journalists, social activists, digital activists, and citizen journalists, and even, normal people noticed the suppression of some Palestinian perspectives and some Palestinian, voices on Facebook and Instagram. A lot of people have talked about this. They have talked about, reducing the reach or removing some of the posts that were pro-Palestine. Algorithm systems flagged a lot of words, hashtags, and images as sensitive, resulting in reduced visibility or demonetization of some posts, especially those with Palestine, and this caused a lot of problems.
Yeah, it was just because I know that in this kind of situation, always people will find a way how to evade social media algorithms. And pro-Palestinian content creators, I think they were quite creative, actually, right? Do you have some more creative examples how they try to evade these algorithms?
Actually, in many ways, they were like using some symbols or writing, the word Palestine with, asterisks, and some, like using the symbol of a watermelon to refer to the Palestinian flag because it has like similar colors. They were, not completing the sentences and using some emojis to complete the sentences so people would understand what they're talking about. So they were like trying to sometimes hijack hashtags, so use hashtags that are not that relevant, but in order to get their voices heard and to get some traffic and reach on their, posts. So these are creative ways for people to challenge algorithms and challenge, shadow banning on social media platforms. I think TikTok, many people perceive that TikTok was better in terms of that. It allows them to like create more videos and to talk about the Gaza war in a more open way. That's a way to like also look at the power of algorithms and algorithmic design and their control over, gatekeeping what messages can reach more people, what messages can reach people in certain parts of the world. And this definitely changes our traditional understanding of gatekeeping as a power in the hands of journalists, because on social media platforms, gatekeeping is a shared responsibility, and many actors, including algorithms and the algorithmic design of each social media platform, plays a great role in controlling and disseminating certain news, and while curating and restricting others.
Yeah, so it's a very much modern way of censorship. Do you think it changed the attitude in the Middle East? It changed the attitude towards the big tech, or actually, it's people do not think in that direction. People just what is this thinking, by the way? So how did it affect people's trust towards these platforms?
So I actually didn't do any research on people's trust, towards tech companies, but my own impression is that, we have to differentiate between, like journalists who are already aware of fact checking and aware of mis and disinformation, and the normal people who are deceived by whichever they find online. So unfortunately, in many parts of the, Middle East, we don't have high AI literacy and digital literacy when it comes to what to believe and what not to believe. And that's like the major threat here. But honestly, I think journalists are aware of all of that. And I saw a lot of journalists, Arab journalists commenting on their social media saying that it's just like so horrible, the new decision to like eliminate fact checking and to undermine the power of fact checking, especially in social media platforms, so in Facebook. So it's a major problem, but I don't think the public audience have enough understanding of its implications and its major consequences.
I want us to move to India because you researched how AI was used and abused during the Indian elections. But before we move to India, I actually want to hear from you at least one positive example from the Middle East, because we had now lots of gloom and doom, this is bad, that is bad. What is good there? Anything you observed that you thought, what, in that kind of restricted, limited circumstances, people came up with new things how to deal with it.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to be like pessimistic about this technology, because actually, and I don't also to be very techno optimistic. So, but honestly, I found out that a good example I heard recently from an Egyptian journalist was how it helped them to use AI art generators, especially AI tools that can create visuals and can create illustrative pictures that they can attach to their news stories. And I heard from that journalist that this is a game changer, because in many of the stories that involved vulnerable people, especially children, they found it like a great alternative to use AI art generators, although they are still also having some concerns regarding the copyrights and the privacy and all of that. But they found out that some of these AI generated visuals help provide good and very engaging, visuals with their stories, instead of depending on, sensitive photos that might harm people. So it can reduce harm, it can, engage people, engage audience without, exposing the identity and the faces of real people. So that's one side, one good side. Also, I think it became like a good thing to use chatbots like ChatGPT on your WhatsApp, so you can ask questions about anything, anytime, very quickly, get, like insights. Even when you're interviewing someone and you're stuck with the question, you can like just like search for it and a question, like an answer, or rephrase your question quickly. So it makes lives easier, but we still need to be very critical, aware, and cautious about how to use this technology without harming our people, especially in places where mis and disinformation is already so high.
Okay, so let's move to India now, where I am now working with some small newsrooms. All of those have the same problems you were just describing, and the same kind of feeling in a way that, being a bit burned out, that they feel that they're behind, left behind. So could you tell us about Indian elections and how generative AI technology was used and abused during those elections?
I have this research project where I collaborated with some of Indian journalists. And we found out that the 2024 Indian elections, gave a unique context for examining the impact of generative disinformation and algorithm-based fabrication on the political discourse, since there was a widespread use of deepfakes, micro-targeting deployed by political parties for enhancing voters' outreach. A lot of people, especially in rural areas, received automated calls targeting individual voters using politicians' voice clones. So voice clones, deepfakes, AI-generated and manipulated images were widespread. Also, it's important to look at which actors contributed to spreading these AI-generated propaganda and this AI-manipulated visuals and text. And here, in this case, like some verified accounts of some celebrities and political actors contributed to that. I found out like a very interesting initiative, which is called Shakti, where 300 journalists from many newsrooms, from many fact-checking organizations came together in order to contribute to fact-checking together, to help each other investigate, maneuver this very AI manipulated political scene. And that was like a great initiative. They got some funding from Google News Initiative to use AI to combat AI, basically. And they started, investigating the best ways where they can fact check this online content and let journalists know what was AI manipulated, what was AI generated, what was fake news, and what wasn't. Also, we saw and noticed another initiative that is called the Deepfakes Analysis Unit, DAU. It's a WhatsApp helpline supported by Meta to combat misinformation during the elections in collaboration with the public members. So they gave like this WhatsApp helpline asking the public members if they are suspecting of any content as AI generated, AI manipulated, to like just send it and they can verify it and they can let journalists know about that. If something is like circulating on social media platforms and it's not correct, then journalists can post or publish about that to let people know and to educate people. So these are good initiatives, but I'm also skeptical about their sustainability. So the first initiative, Shakti, is supported by Google News Initiative, and the second one is supported by Meta. But this happened during the Indian elections. What about the sustainability of those funds? What about the sustainability of this, tech companies backing those, local initiatives? What about the future of those initiatives?
So in one of my previous episodes, I talked to founder of the Factly, Rakesh Debodu, so India's fact-checking website. And he, because their team thinks a lot as well how to diversify and how to decrease the dependence on big tech, because they've been also, supported by Meta and Google. They are launching their own products, their own AI-powered chatbots. Again, it's very ironic that we are talking about, on the one hand, we were just talking about Gaza and how this algorithmic bias, how it was perceived with anger in a way, right, in the Middle East. And then on the other hand, people are getting financial support from those organizations like Google and Meta. So how do you see this relationship between big tech and the media industry? It used to be, almost a love affair. Now seems like it's turning into some form of toxic relationship, because it's becoming almost a liability for media industry to be involved with big tech like this, because of what we just discussed earlier.
I agree with you. Relationship, started like as a love relationship, then it turned into a more stressful type of pressure on journalism to a great extent. And I think I always say we have to think about a new era of gatekeeping and agenda setting as journalists, because we are no longer those setting the agenda for the public on the most important topics, and we are not gatekeeping, topics and sources and all of that. Now tech companies play a great role in all of that, decreasing the power of journalists to a great extent. And although it's just like a passive aggressive type of relationship, journalists have to find alternative ways to maintain their power over the content. And they have to also let people know and educate people more about the role of algorithms, the role of tech companies in controlling the type of content, type of political discourse, the type of posts and visuals people receive in during some events in some parts of the world. People need to understand, I think this is the key to understanding journalistic work right now, is to understand what limits certain journalistic content to spread in a way or another, what limits certain voices to be heard, or what makes certain voices underrepresented in social media platforms because they are moderated in a way that is not fair and biased to a great extent.
How can we, Rana, how can we as a media industry and as a society protect ourselves from technology which, as we see, can be used as a weapon of propaganda and misinformation? What are possible solutions? Did you discover any possible solutions in those newsrooms, either in the Middle East or in India?
Actually, I think the major solution that I heard from many journalists, especially in India, is always about, raising the awareness about the topic to people. Because, for example, when you find that rural people in many rural areas, they believe that those political, candidates were calling them over the phone, although it was an automated AI generated call using a voice clone for this person, you need to stop and think of the level of literacy that these people still need. And I don't think this is like an Indian problem or like an Arabic problem or anything. I think it's just like a major problem. The technology is like very fast growing and people are not able to cope up with how the latest technologies are influencing their life. They don't understand what is going on. They are still blindsided when it comes to like believing a lot of stuff on social media platforms. So I think the major thing is about educating people and enlightening people, and journalism has to play a great role in that, in educating people regarding those new technologies, though the influence of those new technologies, to give people more information about like how to detect, for example, AI manipulated photos. It might be so hard at the beginning since we won't get everyone understanding this, but it's a major responsibility on our side as journalism educators and journalists to actually get the message out to the public and try to open up like societal discussion about the dangers and the downside of those technologies, so people would understand how to perfectly use them to their own benefit and how to avoid all of the privacy, misinformation, copyright violations, and all of the other downsides and drawbacks of this technology.
Tell me, as an educator, what's missing in the current education system? Do you think it's on par with all the rapid changes in the tech and media industry? And I'm talking about journalism schools education.
Actually, I think what was missing is philosophy of how to integrate the latest technology in our teaching and research methods so we can empower our students to be ready for the future. Because I felt and I got like from, as I previously mentioned, from my research, that a lot of resistance against the new AI technologies was due to journalists' lack of understanding and knowledge about the technology. I decided to introduce a new module called AI Enhanced News Reporting last semester, and to teach our third year journalism students how to effectively and ethically use AI tools, whether, like how to use generative AI tools for fact checking, data verification, data visualization, interview transcription, AI art generation, and data analysis, or how to learn about some of the programming, basic knowledge of programming languages such as Python, to be able to code, to be able to use AI libraries, to be able to deal with this latest technology and feel on the top of everything and not feel threatened by it.
I have 3 blitz questions to you, very short questions, and I want one sentence answer. Just, fire, don't think. So what's your personal life hack for journalists and storytellers regarding using AI?
They have to experiment with different online tools till they find like a tool that actually good enough for what they are doing.
What are your 3 dominant emotions about the rapid development of AI?
Uncertainty, excitement, and fear.
The future of journalism, how would you describe it in 3 words?
This is a hard question, actually. But I think it's AI driven. Future of journalism is more important than now and similar dependence on the human actors.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of AI-FLUENT with me, Ilona Vinogradova, and feel a bit less alone in your newsroom's everyday struggles. This podcast was produced by Love & Film's Pro Media Lab. If you would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with your friends and colleagues if you think they might find it useful or inspirational. And if you really like this podcast, review it on your listening app of choice. It will help us to reach more storytellers and make them feel part of a bigger community. I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, take good care of yourself and each other.